I'm the unsilent majority, Big Mouth.
Somebody who joins us every Thursday on the program and would be well aware of the influence that this Belt and Road program has, particularly in the Pacific region, as the former Minister for the Pacific, is New South Wales Liberal Senator Concetta Fierravanti-Wells. Connie, good morning.
Good morning, Stephen.
A great move by the Foreign Minister. She's also, along with your successor in that role, Zedza Selja, currently visiting their counterparts in New Zealand after this travel bubble has opened up. Our relationship with New Zealand probably needs a fairly strong look at the moment too.
Well, I think it certainly does. Obviously, our relationship and the stability, security and prosperity of our region is second only to the defence of Australia. And that was something that I maintained very much as Minister. So I have no doubts that there'll be a number of items on the agenda, vaccine rollout, our respective responses to COVID, and of course the relationship with China will be on the agenda. And Stephen, can I just say on that point, and in your opening comments about the BRI, I mean, New Zealand has a proud record on the world stage, and it's taken a stance on all sorts of issues, including against nuclear testing in the Pacific, when they paid the price of the French retribution when the Rainbow Warrior was sunk in Auckland Harbour. However, I have to say that New Zealand's dalliance with Beijing is on par with Chairman Dan's foray with the BRI in Victoria, and I think it's time that the Kiwis woke up to Beijing's skullduggery, including the possible consequences of debt trap diplomacy.
But it really highlights why and you get a lot of people that say we need to cancel foreign aid and spend the money at home, etc. But this really highlights why we have such an important role to play in the Pacific region, because as I mentioned at the top of the program, the top of the hour, that there are some of these smaller Pacific nations that are so desperate for investment that they're willing to sell out to China because they have no other choice. New Zealand seems to have fallen into that same trap, and I'm still struggling to get my head around that.
Well, I think certainly when I was Minister many years ago, 5 years ago, I started talking about the practices, particularly of debt trap diplomacy in the Pacific, and Stephen, I was hung out to dry, and it's ironic that the very people who hung me out to dry at that time are now in a position where they're making decisions. I welcome those decisions, but can I just say that it was this new foreign relations legislation always would capture, I had hoped it would capture the Victorian arrangements with different totalitarian regimes. But I have expressed concerns that this legislation doesn't act retrospectively. For example, it can't be used to take back the Port of Darwin. And it's also defective in that it excludes the arrangements between state and territory governments with private corporations. And those are the ones which are most troubling and which involve strategic assets where, effectively there is no private company in China, because the operation of China's company and national security laws means that the CCP exercises effective control over both its state-owned enterprises and its private companies, and that's how they've operated, and that's how the whole issue of Belt and Road is so insidious, whether it's in New Zealand or whether it's across the Pacific. And the other thing is, Stephen, let's not forget that some of the debt-to-equity ratios in the Pacific, certainly at the time when I was Minister, ranged from about 25 to 90%, and I have no doubts that those figures haven't changed effectively.
Absolutely extraordinary. The Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide is going ahead. In Senate estimates, you recently questioned both the Chief of Army regarding the Brereton report and the Secretary of Veterans Affairs regarding the Royal Commission. The government seems to have been dragged kicking and screaming towards this, and I don't understand the politics of being so reluctant to go ahead with this in the end.
Well, I was very pleased that the government finally agreed to a Royal Commission. As I indicated at estimates recently, there is nothing to preclude a Royal Commission making recommendations which could include a standing commissioner of the kind proposed by the government. So on that point, I just couldn't understand why this was such a difficult decision. And on the Brereton report, I'm pleased that Peter Dutton has retained the meritorious unit citation. I thought it was appalling the way that the SAS was not afforded the presumption of innocence following the release of this protracted Brereton report, which took 4 years in the making. And I'm also concerned about the use of administrative processes to deal with alleged breaches or serious misconduct in wartime. Stephen, at a time when we are talking about the presumption of innocence and the rule of law, and it is much talked about at the moment, surely courts should be deciding these issues. These people should be given and afforded the opportunity to have their say. Instead, what we are seeing is their stories and the incidences and their names are being portrayed in the media and effectively procedural fairness is being denied to them, and this is not right for people that we sent to war.
Absolutely, and I think the important point here that a lot of people miss is that if you look at what we know that's come out of the Brereton report, and obviously a lot of that's been highly redacted and is highly confidential, is that clearly there were some very, very serious breaches here by a very small number of operatives. Now, those people need to be brought to justice, but you've got to be so careful not to smear everybody and we're already talking 12 or 19 people out of however many, thousands and thousands of troops that we've deployed overseas, particularly in the last 20 years. Let's weed out those bad apples, but it's been so badly handled.
Well, Stephen, when we sent these men to war, and now presumably they were subject to the laws of armed conflict, and there would have been the terms of their rules of engagement. But like Vietnam, let's not forget that there were many scenarios where our SAS were in situations where it was difficult to determine who their enemy were. So my question, and this is my questioning to the Chief of Army, was why are we taking action, particularly harsh administrative action, after such a protracted inquiry against men we sent to war? And given the severity of termination as an outcome to this administrative action, surely these men should be given the right of due process of a trial where any evidence and any witnesses can be tested. This is really the point. We talk about presumption of innocence. This is a basic tenet of our law. And if it's good enough for other circumstances, if it's good enough to argue for politicians as a consequence of certain incidences, well, I have to say to you, we have to test this evidence, and they have to be afforded procedural fairness. I mean, I spent many years as a government lawyer, 20 years with the Australian Government Solicitor in Defence was one of my main clients, and I have to tell you that I am very concerned about the use of administrative action to deal with alleged breaches of conduct during war fighting. There are procedures, and they should be followed, and those individuals should be afforded sooner rather than later the presumption of innocence and their matters tried in appropriate court of law.
Absolutely, and that is a very, very important point. I mean, it's all well and good to say that we need to bring people to justice, but they need to be brought to justice, not to punishment. Without, by skipping
And there, I have to say, Stephen, it was appalling, the rush to judgment, the immediate rush to judgment in relation to this issue. And, of course, we had the meritorious unit citation. I mean, the procedures in relation to that citation were taken months and months before the Brereton report, the redacted version of the Brereton report was even released.
Yeah, an extraordinary failure. Let's hope that the Royal Commission brings all of this to light and that we do solve some of these problems. Connie, good to talk to you. We'll catch up again next week.
Thanks a lot, Stephen.
Senator Concetta Fierravanti-Wells back with us next week. Of course,